Thank you as well. So the first thing to say is that I'm being recorded, which means that anything you say is also potentially being recorded, just so that you know. Thank you ever so much for being prepared to be here to listen to me, and thank you obviously to OUP for being willing to sponsor the prize, and also for the whole machinery around it, which has been a wonderful experience for me, certainly, to get me to reflect on my teaching practice, why I do what I do, what works, what doesn't work, and what I need to do about it. And I always, it always feels slightly challenging to be up in front of a group of wonderful law teachers and say, hello, I'm a prize winner for law teaching. Because many of you in the room will be significantly more adept at it than I am. But thank you for being here anyway. Now, I want to acknowledge, to start off with, that I really do know that we're in changing and somewhat challenging times in the context of legal education. I suspect everybody who started a presentation like this has probably said that. I think that's an ongoing issue. But I do want to acknowledge that the challenges that many of us are facing, whether it's TEF, competition for student numbers, which some of us are struggling with, some of us are struggling with tight budgets, the discussion around pathways to legal professional recognition, what's happening with the SQE, don't know, and in some contexts an instrumental emphasis on employability. Not in all contexts, some of us are able to deal with it holistically, but there are challenges there, I understand that. And that's the challenges that we're dealing with. There's also the potential seismic shifts coming in terms of the way in which the legal profession is developing, or legal services are developing, or the legal services market is developing as well. And I'm going to touch upon that a little bit. Many of the presentations over the last 2 days have recognised the fact that there is a feeling that student expectations have changed over time. What they expect from us, what they expect from university, has changed, and that's quite a challenge for all of us. So I acknowledge that we're operating in changing and challenging contexts, and it does feel a bit like a tipping point, especially as we wait for the SQE. Is it? Isn't it? Is the bar going to stick with the very traditional 7 foundations, or are they going to be prepared? I know they've come out and said we want the QLD. Is it going to look the same? Are we going to have different routes through for students? All of that means it feels a bit anxiety-inducing. So, what am I going to try and do today in the time that I've got available? Well, my intention is to offer some thoughts, and they're just thoughts, about how I think we can probably hold on to our values and enhance our values as law teachers. I hope that we can do that. Embrace new ways of seeing and doing legal education, to help our students. I think we can do that and combine some of the best elements of what we've already got. And we've got loads of brilliant stuff. I mean, this conference is a testament to brilliance, your brilliance, all the great things that are happening. But also take on some of the sort of innovations that are happening outside legal education as well, in the hope that I can inject a positive note into this challenging context. That's my intention, I hope. Okay, so what I want to start with is our values and our mission as law teachers. And I want to start with that because that was the bit, this has been the bit that's been the most rewarding for me about the whole OUP law teacher process. Anybody who gets through to the shortlist will know you actually have to reflect on your teaching practice and your values as a teacher. Not just what you do, but why you do it. And how you feel about that. How you feel about your teaching. How you feel about your students. And so I'd like us to think about why we teach. Why we teach. Now there's the obvious flip answer, to pay the mortgage. But there are lots of other ways we could do that rather more profitably, let's face it. So we've all made a commitment, everybody here in the room has made a very firm commitment to law teaching. Otherwise they wouldn't be at the ALT conference. And they've done that in the face of a lot of challenges. And so in sort of true teaching fashion, what I'm going to ask you to do is just to spend a couple of minutes thinking about why you teach. Why do you teach? And I'm actually going to ask you to do that now. You've got 3 minutes. There you go. Why do you teach? And if you can talk to the people around you, it's not a test. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'm sorry to break into what look to be very animated conversations, but I'd like to hear from anybody who wants to. I'm not going to pick on anybody. But anybody who wants to share anything about why they teach, just bear in mind that you are being recorded. And your students may get to hear it. Thank you. Yes?
I'm going to do the soppy one.
Go on. Fine.
I decided to teach, and I love teaching because I want to give to my students what I was given by my lecturers, and that was confidence and belief that I could do it. And that's the reason that I come into work every day, is because I want to give my students that belief that they can do what they want to do.
I don't think that's soppy. I think that's very laudable. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes?
Yes, because I really enjoy the law, which I've been studying or teaching since the age of 17.
Wow.
I'd like to instill in my students that love and enjoyment of the law, which I hope they would take throughout their life.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I enjoy the students' company and the conversation.
Thank you. I've got one more, Jess. Yeah, I'll come back after that. Yeah.
Because someone has any other question. Oh, sorry, Jess.
Oh, yeah, I'll come to you and then I'll come to Jess in front.
Okay. There's no other profession where you get to have this much positive influence on people's lives.
Thank you. Jess.
I think it's quite nice. I was going to say because I want to change the world.
Well, we can only do that one person at a time. Thank you. I'm going to stop there because I think we've got a flavour of why. Now I'm going to put up what I had on a slide, not necessarily in relation to just me, but in relation to conversations I've had and also the literature, the various different ones. Actually, I'll go forward this way and then I'll come back. Okay, so to help students develop legal and broader knowledge and skill, that's the sort of one that gets trotted out. To get them from where they are to where they want to be and beyond. And then to help students to build their capacity to learn independently, to help and lead others, flexibility of thought, resilience in the face of challenge and change, values and identity, to inspire as we were inspired to give something back, as some of the reasons that people give. And we've got others here too. These are very, very important, laudable values. It's wonderful that that's why people teach. And I'd like us to just hold on to these as I'm working my way through the rest of the presentation. I am going to double back, I hope, at the end. But this is why we do what we do. And now we need to think about what we do and the context within which we do it, which might trip some of this up. And what we can do about it, hopefully, to try and realise our aspirations, make our values real. Okay, so I'm going to see whether I can... Is that going to go back? Yes? Yes. Good. Hurrah. Okay, so what do we teach? The what rather than the why? Well, obviously we've got some legal rules, some legal and transferable skills, some graduate attributes in the mix. We may teach different ways of looking at and critiquing the world more broadly. Perhaps a greater understanding of self. That might be not just students, their understanding of self. It may actually teach us ourselves more about ourselves. But I think we need to acknowledge that there is a dark or an implicit or a hidden curriculum, not necessarily negative, but it's not just what we teach in the this is what we aspire to teach. It's also the signals we transmit or we do not counter in the context of our teaching, which the students get, but we're not necessarily aware they get, which might trip up some of what we're hoping to achieve. So there are messages, doesn't matter in any walk of life, there are messages that go out into the world. People aren't necessarily conscious of them. Those receiving them may not be conscious of them. But it's about having a bit of a think about what those may be. And that probably underlies an awful lot of the frustration that many of us feel when we say, the thing is, I gave them this feedback and they seem to hear something else. I explained why we were doing this, but they seem to understand something else. I think I was clear, but the message sent and the message received were not quite congruent. So let's have a bit of a think about why that might be for them, for students, because a number of the presentations and the conversations people have been having outside have been about not quite sure I understand the student's mindset to then be able to unlock what I need to unlock to get them where they need to be. So what I'd like to focus on now is teaching within a context, the student self. I'm not saying this is what we are transmitting to them, but this is, I think, what is being generally transmitted to them. And it means that they are hearing all our conversations through this lens. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to focus on some some research that I've been doing in the context of the legal profession. I'm transferring it from the legal profession across to legal education. And that's looking at talent management, or the extent to which how we recognise ability, how we measure ability, and what messages we send about ability. And in doing that, I've spent some time looking at Tansley's work. Now, I'm happy to give people references to this later if you're interested. This is very dichotomous. I understand this is very dichotomous. It's been starkly put, but it illustrates the point better doing it this way. When we talk about talent or ability, what do we mean? I don't necessarily mean us. I mean society more generally. And there is a suggestion, and it's very deeply embedded within the literature on talent management, that there's quite a Western worldview of it and there's an Eastern worldview of it, without people necessarily being aware this is a worldview. So the Western conception is that talent is a gift. We even have talented and gifted programs. It's a gift. People are born with talents. Not to say they can't improve, but they're gifts. And gifts are things that are given. They're not things that we develop in ourselves. They're given. We can choose to exploit the gift. We can choose instead to ignore the gift, but it's a gift. If it's a gift, it's always been there. So there are early signs of giftedness. We just have to spot them. And then bring them out. Bring them out. And it's exceptional. Being gifted is exceptional. It makes you special. And if you're special, you're more worthy. Okay, so that's the Western, broadly Western conception. I'm not saying that everybody in the room's got this view, just saying that's the sort of the view within which we're operating. And that's why talent spotting and the X factor thing and all the rest of it, it's there. You just have to spot it. And then that person will be an overnight success because they're special and they're gifted. We just need to find them. Go out on a search. Eastern conception, again, I know this is very dichotomous, works the other way. So this is not about innate gifts. This is about striving, hours and hours and hours of practice with somebody more experienced, constantly pointing out corrections. Do it this way. Watch me. Follow me. No, you're not doing this right. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Okay? So it's a product of striving. So it's within anybody's reach as long as they are prepared to put in the hard work. Developed over time and experience, you look for evidence of a person's character to strive to succeed. So it's another end of the spectrum. Now obviously the reality is much more in the middle somewhere. Some things come much easier to us than others. Having said that, we, I think, would all recognise as long as people get some useful feedback and they strive and they practice in a deliberate way, they can improve tremendously. Otherwise we wouldn't teach, it'd be pointless. But that's not the message that's out there that's colouring everything for students. It may explain some of the frustrations and difficulties that some people have been talking about in papers about some international students coming in with a very different view of what's expected of the teacher-student relationship. Say, hang on a minute, if I work very hard and you keep showing me, you show me, I'll do it. You show me, I'll do it. You show me, I'll do it. Well, just keep doing that. What do you mean I need to go and do it on my own? You show me, I do it. We just need to keep doing this. Versus this is all hopeless. You're telling me I can't do it at the moment. Well, I'm as good as I'm ever going to be, except for a little bit of tweaking around the edges. What's hard work going to do? Okay, so starkly put, I understand that. But interesting difference in mindsets, potentially. Okay. And so if one were looking for talent as a gift, one will be setting up the proxies, how we measure giftedness, rather differently than if we're looking for people who will succeed on the basis of striving. So we're going to look at early signs at school. How would you know if somebody was gifted? They'd have great grades. How do universities select students? Grades. Okay, apparent ease of trajectory. Now you can have one blip, but multiple blips? It's starting to look a bit shaky. What high status accolades have you got as evidence of this innate talent? What do we look for? Now, not all of us do. I understand that. Some institutions don't. They do an open access, but you know, this message is all the way through, runs all the way through. So they come into us with that. Now, if we were looking for striving, we'd be looking for early signs of commitment to hard work, apparent willingness to overcome obstacles, to strive. Now, I think for many of us, students' ability to overcome obstacles is a real indicator of success for many of us in higher education. But it's seen as success outside too. Having a bit of a backstory is no bad thing if you're going to be on, you know, a talent show and all the rest of it. But that's usually about somebody putting an obstacle in your way and your innate talent came through in the end, as opposed to actually you gradually pulled up your ability over time. There's not much excitement and heroicism in the notion that actually I got better. I became more intelligent. It sounds odd. People think intelligence is fixed out there. It's not true. And time spent developing one's talent. So how we set up our notion of ability and talent, and how society does, affects what we look for as markers of talent. What makes somebody... We want the most intelligent, capable students. What are we looking for? And that means that we then set up... Sorry, this is very small. We then set up the whole system without realising it with this particular pair of glasses on. And it's not necessarily us. I understand that. It's the world out there. So we believe we know what ability is, but we can't systematically test it easily without spending hours and hours and hours with people. We can't do that. So what we all do is we come up with proxies that measure things that allow us an insight into the ability. Well, if a student can demonstrate X, then that means that they're actually potentially very good at this. Or Y, we think that's evidence of this. Z is evidence of this. But we actually interpret that through the lens that we've got, through the glasses we're wearing. We all do it. Confirmation bias. People fulfill our expectations, generally speaking. It's rare that they buck the trend. And that leads the world out there to promote people, hire people on the basis of the proxies for excellence that they have in their head as objective measures. The thing about proxies, in the end we forget they're a proxy. We think they're the thing themselves. If they manage to do this against this criteria, that means they are whatever it is we are looking for. No, it means on the day they performed against that criteria to that extent, which may or may not demonstrate their excellence. Okay. Now, I'm taking a slight step sideways and then I'm going to come back. So, I'm talking about students operating within a context. They're coming in to us with a worldview about what is ability and excellence. And being excellent means that you are worthy and special, and not being excellent means you're an also-ran. And there's not a lot you can do to change that, because being excellent is a gift, which you've got or you haven't got. Now, if we combine that with the way in which our brains think things through, we get a really potent, difficult cocktail, particularly in the context of adolescence, where everything else is going on for them. The whole world is going on for them. Now, too broad, and again, I know this is broad brush and dichotomous, but look at Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2 thinking, which is simply labelling things from the psychological literature, is that actually our brain prefers this System 1 thinking, which is quick, easy decision making. This is the sort of the decision-making pattern in the brain that developed way back in primitive times. It's what keeps us safe and secure. It's what means that we don't get eaten by a lion. You know, something over here jumps out. Safest thing for our bodies to say is, it could be a threat, peg out. Go on, run, move. Whenever we're emotional, this one is what's calling the shots. So if we are in a stressful situation, an upsetting situation, this one is what's causing the decision making. Okay? It's pretty reliable about those it could be a lion situations, or, you know, don't run out in front of the road, all of that stuff. It's there as a safety mechanism. It's not brilliant with anything that requires the complex weighing of evidence or reflection. This is not a reflective way of thinking. This is a let's go quickly way of thinking. Over here, now this is what we need them to be using in the context of their growth and development, and also in the context of law, which is complicated. We need them to weigh evidence, consider alternatives. This is where we get into analysis and critical analysis. This is where we get into quick thinking and run for it. Okay. So, we need to move them from here to here if we are going to fulfill our aspirations to get them to develop. This isn't a development opportunity. This is a closed mindset opportunity which will keep them safe but protected. This is, I just want to look at a first-class piece of work from last year and I'll copy it. That's what this is. In reality, it's safer for me to copy something I know that's going to work than to go out and try and do this independently and on my own. Okay. Now I know I'm dotting around a bit. I hope it will come together. That is the plan. Okay, so the context within our students are operating. They're operating in a context that valorises excellence from the beginning and is constantly scanning the horizon for innate gifts. Penalises failure, because if you fail at something, if you do poorly at something, that tends to suggest you're not that gifted. Has the individual as the unit. It's very much an individual system. I am being assessed. I don't necessarily mean assessed in our way, but I am constantly being considered, am I excellent or not? Often starts from the premises of deficits, what you don't have to be overcome. These aren't learning opportunities. They are for us, but not in this world. It's grounded in the past. What happened before? I don't want to be eaten by a lion. My ancestors were. Therefore, if it's a difficult situation, I'm out of here. Or, let's play it safe, basically. Let's play it safe. And has hard work as the thing that one does if one's not gifted, rather than it's the thing that you do in order to become excellent. So, to what extent do we explicitly dislodge this in what we do, or implicitly dislodge it, or to what extent are we actually, without realising it, embedding it? And I think that's a difficult question for all of us, actually. So that's the student self. So that's the context we've got going on, and we're coming up with all these brilliant, wonderful, I mean the stuff that I've heard over the last 2 days, wonderful initiatives. And people saying, do you know, we're trying to get students to do the reflection. They just won't do it. Won't do it properly. They really weren't engaged with reflection. Well, showing weakness, not gifted. So, what new ways of being and doing law could we embrace? And I want to take another step on, and then in a slightly different direction, and then come back. I promise I am coming back. Okay, so we've got that going on with our students when they come in. What we've also got going on is the world out there too, in terms of legal practice and the changing nature of legal practice. And I know many people have been whittering on about this for decades. It's all going to change. Computers are taking over the world. Robots are taking over the world. We won't need lawyers and all the rest of it. But we are starting to see some changes, and the presentation that's being given by Kirsten after mine is actually going to show you some of that. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. But I think it's fair to say that most legal work will be undertaken outside formal legal practice relatively soon. An awful lot of legal work is done outside formal legal practice. That's law firms or chambers. Because we have a very, very narrow and authorised practice of law rules with the reserved activities, you know, anybody at all can provide legal advice. You don't need to have any legal qualification. You don't need to have any insurance. I mean, you obviously do if you're admitted and a legal professional. There's an awful lot of legal work that's happening outside law practice. And we've also got an increase in technology-assisted legal services, which is now starting to edge in the direction of not just assisted, but increasingly delivered legal services. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time on that because Kirsten's going to deal with that in her presentation to an extent. But there are signs that things are starting to change in terms of the world that some of our students are going to be going out into. I've got students now coming back to me to say that they're now involved in legal startups in terms of algorithmic programming. They're being employed because they've got legal knowledge to try and assist data scientists, computer scientists, working with lawyers and asking these questions of the law graduates. What's the major area of work in any organisation or in their organisation or department? Major area of work and the tasks involved in delivering it, number one. So what are you doing and what are the tasks? Two, which processes are there and where are the decision points? Some processes are just linear and others you get to a stage where somebody's going to have to make a decision. A decision has to be made. Do we do this or that? Is it this or is it that? Which of these can be routinized, which can be automated, and which must be bespoke? Which ones must, in the end, be lawyer-led, person-led? Some will, but not all, by any means. They're actually asking slightly different questions of businesses who actually purchase legal services. And I'm not going to go into that now, I don't have the time. But nonetheless, there's all this going on out there. I think that's all I'm really trying to get across. And so what they're basically doing is they're pushing the law graduates who are working with them to say, right, I'd like you to think about law as a series of tasks and decisions. And then the rules and the cases are about the decisions. They're not the point, from the point of view of delivery of legal services. They are the things that allow you to deliver services. So think about tasks and then think about decisions. And the decisions are where the law comes in. Now the reason I'm telling you this and taking us off on a bit of a tangent is because what if we adopted the data scientist's approach to legal rules and cases? What if we thought about law a little bit differently? And I'm going to come back to the growth mindset and the what have you in a second. What if we did it a bit differently? Now some people in the room I know already are, because I've heard your presentations and they've been wonderful. But at the moment, a lot of law students, we know from the evidence that we've got from them saying, I understand I've got to do this reading. I understand I'm supposed to be reading the cases. Note that you're supposed to be reading the cases. I understand I'm supposed to be reading the law, the statutes. Okay, fine, I understand that. I don't understand why. I mean, I understand I'm supposed to know the law. I understand I'm supposed to use the law. I still don't understand why. And we've got many law teachers saying, look, how much more obvious can we make it? You need to know this stuff to be able to do stuff with it, whatever that stuff is, whether it's legal services or whether it's actually advocating for a change in the law or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be practice in the traditional sense. But I wonder whether some of their issues with that actually relate to this. They don't seem to be able to take that detail and translate it into this. Now we can, because we know it. We're passionate about it. But for them, they don't know why they need to know it, except we tell them they have to. And they say, this is a hurdle I've got to jump through in order to get my qualifying law degree, and then I'll go off and I'll do something else. I'll do the LPC, or I'll do the BPTC, and hopefully then I'll understand how to use it. Because for many of them in other contexts, they've got quite used to the idea that you have knowledge for a reason. The question is, what's the reason? And they haven't got that translation factor sorted yet. How do I take this and use it? So I started to change what I was doing a few years back now in the context of teaching judicial review. Judicial review has historically been taught in a very case-heavy way, awful lot of cases being used to distinguish grounds which have been developed over a long period of time by judges. Loads of cases on illegality, loads of cases on irrationality, procedural impropriety, da 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 da. Well, yes, there are, but the reality is we've got a series of tasks that any student's going to have to engage in if they're thinking about judicial review. This is not even if they're taking a case. This is not necessarily about teaching it in a practice-based way. The tasks are to work out whether or not the client is eligible to even start the judicial review process. So the first thing they need to do is they need to work out who are the parties, and then they need to work out which one is attempting to bring the case, and they need to work that out because that party has to demonstrate standing. If they don't have standing, we're going nowhere. So there's a task there. And the cases are relevant to working out whether or not the client has standing. The cases are relevant for something, they're not just the cases. And then we move on through all the others. So I actually started splitting up my teaching this way, thinking about it this way for the students, at which point a light bulb went on for many of them. If they could have the flowchart of the tasks, and then they knew why they needed the cases, some of them actually started reading the cases. Okay, so what if we adopted the data scientist approach to legal rules and cases? What if we had to just try to think a little bit differently about how we deliver it? Not because how we deliver it is wrong, but just because it doesn't seem to be, the message we send does not appear to be the message that's received. That's number one. Number two, what if we reworked student exercises so that they're designed to highlight deliberate practice? What do I mean by this? Well, there's now a burgeoning body of evidence. If we're trying to move students from that my talent is innate to there's a real plasticity in terms of intelligence and ability, and if you do the right things, you really can pull your intelligence level up. It's not just about you can improve within a narrow band. It really is extremely plastic. So how do we rework student exercises so that they're designed to highlight how they can do that? Well, again, from the psychological literature, we know that deliberate practice with a focus on weakness is actually the way to do it. Okay, weakness. Now, for some people in the room, including me to an extent, the idea of weakness is a negative. And that's us in the Western way of looking at it, which is if you're weak, you're always weak. You can improve a little bit. Now, if you look at it from the other standpoint, brilliant, I've got a weakness. If I've got a weakness, I'm not performing at my potential. And you can always improve on a weakness. So highlighting, not weakness in the context of this is bad, you can't do this, but this is the bit, the next bit you focus on. The next bit you focus on to improve. Focus on that bit, deliberate practice on that bit. Once you've got that fixed, we'll move on to something else. But if I think about how I give feedback to students, I realise, I mean, obviously you start off with something, jolly good, obviously. Jolly good, followed by the, probably do with working on this. You might want to try this. And then something, laudatory at the end. Very well done for all your hard work. Da-da. For getting it in on time, sometimes there's a limit to what you can say. But, let's think of something. Very nicely presented. But actually, perhaps what I would be better off doing is saying, this is the first thing to focus on. Work on this, and this is what you need to do to work on this, and then we'll look at something else. Let's focus on one thing, get that sorted, and then let's move on to something else, as opposed to kitchen sink, you know. And what if we structured our teaching practice to be a really obvious expression of the growth mindset, which is you can improve immeasurably. Not just you can improve your performance, you can actually improve your intelligence. This is not fixed. Yeah, we're born with a quotient, and yes, there probably is a top ceiling, but nobody's found it yet. And if we actually communicated to students, this is within your power. This is not if you put in a load of tedious hard work, you might improve a little bit. This is you could become exceptionally intelligent, capable, well beyond where you are now, but it's going to take a number of things. One, it's going to take an ability to accept feedback, which includes identification of weakness, without having an emotional system 1 response to it. Because the emotional system 1 response is the bit that gets the brain shutting down. You're having a system 1 response, there's no growth mindset, there's only, I'm off. I'm not going to read that anymore. How many of us see students look at the grade's not what they want, I'm not looking at the rest of it. Why? They're emotionally flooded. System 1. I feel awful. And then of course I say, oh, please do read your feedback and reflect on your performance. But you know, if they're reflecting from a world of, this is probably as good as it gets, I put all of that work in. Yes, they put a tremendous amount of work in. It probably wasn't deliberately focused on the thing that will make the difference. Because I'm not sure I highlighted the key thing that would be the first thing to do to make the difference. So what if we structured our teaching practice to be a really obvious expression of the growth mindset? Okay, now it's lots and lots of different threads, and I'm very conscious of that. And when I was working this through, I thought this will either really work or it'll fall flat on its face. So, what do I think the contradictions are? I think there are a number of contradictions. What do we actually believe? Our values. Let's go back to our values. What do we believe? We believe we can make a difference. We believe we can influence people and change how they operate in the world for the better. We believe that we were inspired, and as a result of being inspired, we fulfilled a greater potential than we would have done, and that we can do the same in others. That's our value system, that we can make a difference and they can make a difference. What messages do we transmit? Well, I think we do transmit those messages, but probably along the way we also fall back into some of those innate gift. I've caught myself, and I do feel uncomfortable saying this, but I have caught myself talking about good and poor students. Not necessarily bad, but poor students. The reality is there's good and poor performance. Who knows what the students are capable of if we actually manage to get them to receive the message we're actually transmitting and they can work on it. Who knows? What message do we transmit about hard work? Now, I don't think it's that students are lazy, but if you actually do think there's very little I can do to improve this because talent is innate or it isn't, and then we say to them, there's this, I say this in the context of my text, but there's this whole chapter you need to read. You need to read the chapter. I think, why do I need to read the chapter? You need to read the chapter. Then you need to do these exercises. If I haven't really spelt out, and I don't mean learning outcomes spelt out, I mean really spelt out, if you can only focus really on trying to get one or two things out of it, it's not just the, I need you to understand this, it's the, read it with this intention to improve in this way, as opposed to, I'd quite like you to understand the rule of law at the end of it. We have contradictions about why we're teaching, what we're teaching, and how does that align with our values as teachers. We've got our values over here, and then we've got our curriculum here. And there's some crossover, but I'd hazard a guess, if yours is anything like mine, there are real areas of we're doing this because we sort of feel we have to, we have to do this. Where are we weak? And what are we going to do about it? And that's not weak as in a deficit, that's weak as in a brilliant. If I'm weak, I could be better. So, my intention at the beginning was, I said, that we could hold on to our values, we could recognise them and reflect on them, and hopefully from reflecting on them, we could have a bit of a think about what we could do to make them more part of our practice, so that we thoroughly enjoy our teaching experience and our students thoroughly enjoy it too. I don't think it's about jazz hands, I think it's about us living our values and them actually seeing that and feeling that. Embrace new ways of seeing and developing the curriculum, not so much about content. I think there's too much worry about content. It's about the proxies we develop to assess people and how we sometimes jump over the intermediate steps. We forget this is a proxy. This isn't actually about whether or not somebody is bright and capable. It's the measurement on a day about how they've performed against criteria which we've established to try and assess something we're struggling to assess. And the psychological context within which our students operate, that may go some way to explain why they don't get the message we send, because they're listening for it through quite a challenging lens. And combine the best elements of what we have already. We've got great stuff, rigour, depth, breadth, high-level skills, independence of mind. We've got great stuff there, but with a few tweaks to how we explain to students why we're doing what we're doing, I think we could take them more as partners along the way. In short, to engage students in developing an innovation or growth mindset. And I think if we can do that, we'll be even better than we already are. Thank you ever so much. Now, we do have a little bit of time for questions. I, of course, talked for longer than I was going to, but we also did start about 10 minutes late. So, anybody got any questions? Anybody want to tell me what I need to improve? Constructively, of course. Anybody want to argue with me?
Lisa, thanks very much for an absolutely inspiring talk. She's an inspiring teacher too. She's going to be a PhD supervisor.
And I planted Dorothea in the front, obviously.
Well, I moved recently into this area. What I find very difficult is actually to get the students to engage at all. There's very much this, I don't know what you call it, commodification of education. I'm here for you to teach me the stuff that I can reproduce it so I can get what I'm paying for. And particularly in the area of values, it seems to be almost a no-go area to talk about values, to have a discussion about values. I find it very difficult to put across law at all without talking about values. So people know what my bias is, where I'm coming from, but to try and get them to discuss it and say, really, that's central to law. But it seems from what I've heard from a few people who are long in this area, values now is a no-no. You're not supposed to bring values into the classroom.
Well, I think there's a difference between, personally, I think there's a difference between values in terms of my own ideological views about any number of things and why I teach. And I mean, there's quite a crossover. But I think I think I've made assumptions that students understand why I do what I do and what I'm there for. And that's perhaps unsurprising, but nonetheless, if they have a view of what I'm there for, which is directly opposed to why I think I'm there and what I think they're there for, we're just not going to be able to communicate in an effective fashion. But it's amazing how long you can communicate past each other without actually uncovering it. So I do now start my first lecture with any new module saying this is why I'm here and this is why I'm committed to being here. And it might sound high-flown, but that is why I'm here. And I am committed to you getting the best out of this. But it is a partnership, and it will only work, in my view and in my experience, if you're prepared to engage this way. Now, it's up to you whether you do or not, but as a partnership model, it's not going to work otherwise. And I'm sure many of us have tried that. It doesn't entirely solve the problem, but in our first year's skills module, we do spend time actually doing a bit of the psychology of this right at the very beginning and saying you are going to struggle to develop in this context. You will thrive, we think, in this context if you see the world this way. Give it a try and see. If you're not convinced, you can always go back to the old way of doing it. Doesn't solve the problem entirely, but it does make the messaging a bit easier. Yeah?
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. Particularly the focus on growth mindset. But what I'm thinking of is how do we not only tell the students, to embrace a growth mindset, but how could we work with them? So like, we could expose ourselves. Like, I like learning languages. So I'm thinking a way I could do that would be to expose myself throughout the year, showing them my stumbles and how I got to get from one stage to another. So I think it's going to be difficult standing in front of them and saying, oh, you can grow if you just do it together.
Well, yeah.
How? I think it's better if we do something.
Sure.
Or show them.
I think there are lots of ways that we can message this. There are also ways that we can actually send contrary messages without realising it. So first of all, actually being honest about our trajectory. Now, I mean, some of you are brilliant in the room. You've always been brilliant. You're just naturally brilliant, and you'll have had a smooth, trajectory. I certainly didn't. And first year undergraduates in public law, when I say, well, the chances are 90% of you will end up with better grades at the end of this year in public law than I did in my first year. I said, I ended up with a PhD. There you go. Just goes to show, doesn't it? That I hadn't understood how I needed to learn. Just didn't. I spent loads of time doing it, threw loads and loads of time at it. Still didn't get it. Didn't get it. And once I had got it, it was so much easier. So some of it's about messaging like that. Some of it's messaging in how we write our feedback. Because the more we focus on deficit rather than here's what you need to focus on to improve, and there is the potential here very clearly for you to rock it up. That makes a difference. The language we use in classrooms makes a difference. I mean, I think they're all small things. And yes, of course, we can challenge, but we can actually get the students to give us feedback regularly on what we can improve for their classroom experience. And that can be a growth mindset, modelling of behaviour for them. Yeah. Sorry, did I do it?
Hi, my name's Kathy. I've just returned from a second session of doing some teaching in East Africa, ALT. And I think it's something I hadn't heard in 25 years. The student inmate,
Yeah.
in prison, said that I don't care if I hear that I've got 20%. I just want to know what I have to do to get better. And I think that's a growth mindset.
It is. It is.
Position and fact you've been in prison for 12 years, you don't know if you'll ever come out. Actually, I'm open. I'm absolutely open.
Yeah.
Rather than this position of fear that someone is already judging me as
Yeah.
having been a failure, or you might put me down where I think I was in my A grade, in my B grades. I've only literally just got back, so that's why.
Yeah.
So I haven't worked it all out yet, but I literally have never heard someone say that. I don't care if I'm given 20%. I just want to know what I have to do to grow.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That is really fabulous. And I think we've probably experienced, some of us will have experienced students who have, and there are lots of students with a growth mindset, they just don't know that that's what it is, and that's fine. But they will still have that real stab in their stomach. I mean, I do. When I look at student feedback at times, I look at it and they, say things that I find quite negative, I still have to overcome that feeling of, ooh, hit me in the solar plexus a minute, take a breath, take a breath, take a breath. Move through system 1, move to system 2. Right, come on, let's have a look at the evidence. How much of this do I take as being a learning opportunity, and how much of it do I just write off as being one person's particular perception? But that does take, I'm sure it takes many of us a bit of doing. And I'm not 18, 19 and just seen that I've got a very low grade and working in a world where people say, some people are just very talented and others aren't. And in law, of course, being talented is so important. If being seen as talented if you want to get into the profession, because it's so darn competitive. So we're in a context where having talent is the currency to have a chance of getting into the profession that you want to get into. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the Eastern and Western.
Yeah, and as I say, it's very blunt, but...
I'm just still working it through, but a couple of points. So when you asked us why we teach, our answers were very much
Eastern.
growth mindset.
They were.
They were very much what
Yeah.
labelling as Eastern, but we all, presumably,
Yeah.
most of us will have grown up within a Western mindset. And we put that. And within that Western mindset and values of education that come from the Enlightenment, they are
Yeah.
individualistic.
Yeah.
And I think that influences that phrase we trot out a lot with our students, that there is no right answer, that we want you as an individual
Yeah.
to develop and grow and create your own answer.
Yeah.
And lots of us will have also taught students from an Eastern background, but
Yeah.
they have an Eastern mindset,
Yeah, yeah.
who find that very, very challenging because they say, you're the professor, I want you to give me the answer. So just exploring that.
Yeah, no, and thank you. Those are both brilliant points. So in terms of the why are our answers supposedly, these very blunt boxers, quite Eastern? Well, why are they? Let's have a think about this. I think our experience over time means that we have seen enough, whether we realise it or not, to know that people can genuinely develop positively. We will all have students that we can call to mind, given a couple of minutes, where we think it was just their development was just staggering. We're constantly, unlike most people outside our profession, we are constantly seeing examples of people coming from here and going to there. We also, unfortunately, do see some people who seem to come in here and then because they never actually grow and develop, over time they go down because what we expect of them goes up. So I would suggest, and it's only a suggestion, that the reason that people in the room all put down those reasons is because we have experienced it. And once we've experienced it again and again and again, our mind has been changed. But we forget that the world out there is operating a bit differently, and that's the world the students are coming in from. So I think there's that, would be my suggestion. I think the second thing is, I think the supposedly Eastern model, I think the key there is students want the answer so that they can work out how they can get there. And then they want to try it again through striving, and then they want you to give them the right answer again so they can check their performance and go. So what the Eastern model, as explained by Tansley, is suggesting is it's about continuous, you try hard, somebody gives you the feedback and shows you how to do it properly. So when people are asking for the answer, they're asking to be shown how to do it properly so they can learn from it, and then they want to do it again, and then they want to do it again. So the Eastern one isn't the good one and the Western one the bad one. We actually probably need to be somewhere in the middle between them, because in the end, a growth mindset requires people to be able to critique for themselves. It's just if you've been used to always being shown, and then you do it again, and then shown by somebody more experienced, then you do it again, and we say, there's no right answer. It's up to you. It must be terrifying. Just as if you operate the other way and we say, do you know what? Not us, but the world says, do you know what? It's all fixed. You can improve a little bit, but all these tedious hours of work are not going to improve you so much that you can actually become that talented person. Now that must be very dispiriting too. I've got time for just one more. I'm sorry, and I've got a hand here. Hello there.
For me, more than intelligence, what helps the student to grow and develop is a high degree of motivation. And what we as teachers should do is to motivate them to improve themselves. So if that's why even a highly intelligent student with A-level grades, if they lack the motivation, they're just going to go downhill. Whereas a student with low-level grades who have the motivation, who are determined to become a lawyer, will progress with our help. But it's also for us to conduct our classes so that we keep that or develop that motivation level in students.
I absolutely agree. But I would say motivation is about a growth mindset, and a lack of motivation is about a fixed mindset. You're only motivated if you actually think you're empowered to do something about it. And if you think that this is as good as it's going to get, and it doesn't matter how many hours of work you put in, you're not going to improve that much, you're not going to be motivated. And so by being somebody who motivates students, you are modelling that growth mindset, which is if you actually put in the work and you do it in a way that's going to be effective, and you have a passion and a drive to improve, you will improve. But if students are coming in thinking there's very little they can do in the whole scheme of things, they need to acquire knowledge and display knowledge in order to be able to show they're talented, it's going to be a bit challenging. But you're absolutely right, motivation's key. Thank you ever so much for being prepared to listen to me. I'm very... And I apologise for dashing off, but I'm on the 5:20 plane from Heathrow, so I hope.